The Baltimore Ravens lose a key defender to a significant injury. We talk about the devastating news and what life now looks like for the Baltimore Ravens. All that and more coming up on an instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on this Tuesday evening, live, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen each and every day, or your first listen of the evening. We are free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, so including video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe if you're watching here live on YouTube or just after the fact. And if you're in audio form, of course, we're there as well. You can follow us over there, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And this episode is one that, I hate that we have to do it today. I love going live, love talking about things. I don't love talking about things like this. This is a devastating situation for the Ravens, and it's tough on their defense. Obviously, the big news, the Ravens have lost Ar'Darius Washington. He suffers a torn Achilles, according to Ian Rappaport. This happened while he was conditioning, and he is expected to miss most, if not all, of the 2025 season. It's a devastating blow. I honestly, first of all, feel terrible for Ar'Darius. Yeah, I feel terrible for him. This is a guy that's worked super hard to get to this point. He's obviously dealt with injuries before, and this adds to a long list of injury issues Ar'Darius has had in his short time as an NFL pro. And it's going to be really tough for Baltimore. There are options that, they can get into the building to replace Ar'Darius, and we'll talk about that more in the final part of the show as well, is at length tomorrow. So be sure you check in for tomorrow as we kind of dive into life without Ar'Darius a little more over there. But I feel so bad for him, and it's a big loss for the defense. We'll talk about that, what it means for Kyle Hamilton, guys who are available on the roster. But you just feel for a guy that has worked so hard to get to this point. And it's news that kind of rattles you, and especially because it happened, while he was conditioning, while he was working, to get better. And that's currently all we know at this point. Obviously, as more news comes out, we will react to it on future shows. And even if stuff comes out over the course of this live, we'll react to it here. The MRI has confirmed this, and he was expected to play a huge role in what Baltimore was going to do on defense this year. Obviously, this makes the Malachi Stark selection that much more important. There were a lot of people who were really unhappy with the Malachi Stark selection. It felt like there were a lot of people who were overjoyed by it, but it also kind of felt like there were some people who were saying, man, safety in the first round, what are you doing? What are you doing? And obviously you can't predict stuff like this to happen, but it's why the Ravens do what they do. It's why the Ravens take best player available, because you can't predict things like this. And it's a super unfortunate part of football, where injuries, non-contact injuries, it's sports. We saw it last night with Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics in the playoffs. Like, non-contact, one wrong move, and you have a significant injury on your hands. So them losing Ar'Darius is going to be a big blow. Obviously, the thing that I love about Ar'Darius, there are a couple of things, but something I've talked about pretty at length on this show, if you've been listening or watching for a while here, is Ar'Darius just feels like he's always in the right place at the right time. It felt like in those clutch moments, or when the Ravens needed a boost, when they needed a spark, Ar'Darius was there. The plays that I'm referring to, and there are others, but the Russell Wilson fumble in that Pittsburgh game in Baltimore felt like Pittsburgh at that point had momentum. And Ar'Darius knocking that ball away from Russell as he was trying to lower his shoulder in there. Ar'Darius, he got the ball out, and that gave Baltimore a lot of momentum. You can look to the Christmas game against the Texans, where it was a big fourth down play. Joe Mixon is running down the right sideline towards the end zone, and Ar'Darius whoops him out of bounds. He wallops him, and he goes out. Trey White finishes off the play. And all of a sudden, it's a turnover on downs for Houston instead of 7 points. And that was, again, a momentum play. Now, that Houston game, Baltimore was going to win, I think, regardless of that. I mean, the Ravens just dominated. But part of that is because Ardarius captured momentum. And the Ravens have multiple guys that do that. Marlon Humphrey had those plays last year. Kyle Hamilton had those plays last year. There are a lot of other guys that can do that on Baltimore's defense. But Ardarius was the one. He was, in my opinion, the most underrated part of that turnaround, where obviously Marcus Williams wasn't working out, Eddie Jackson wasn't working out. Out of last resort, Baltimore had to turn to, okay, Ardarius, you're going out there and you're playing with Kyle Hamilton in the deep part of the field, and obviously they move guys around, and Ardarius and Kyle Hamilton as that duo helped turn the secondary around. And obviously the whole qualifying offer situation for him this offseason, I think he was upset with the fact that he didn't get a longer-term deal, and it's for exactly this reason, where, again, maybe Baltimore was reluctant to do that based off of his injury history and said, hey, prove it to us for one more season, and we'll reward you here. But he's likely not going to have that opportunity. I'd be pretty shocked if he does suit up for Baltimore this year. Maybe there's an outside chance, depending on the severity of the tear, that he returns for the stretch part of the year. But even so, it might be a bit of a Keaton Mitchell situation where he might not trust himself fully, or it's going to take some time for him to get back to feeling like himself, even once he's cleared to play. So it's a tough loss all around. Obviously, I think that there are ways Baltimore can recover from this. Obviously, Malachi Starks is a big reason why, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that losing Ardarius, losing that option is a pretty big blow, especially when it was, I think, going to be a really big year for him. I think they were going to utilize him in a lot of different ways, whether it be in the nickel, obviously in the deep part of the field. You can use him there. His knack for turnovers and big plays is going to be really missed. So it's a tough situation. I mean, I just keep coming back from that keep coming back to that because it's brutal. You know, he is used in a bunch of different formations, and while you still have options to replace him, whether it be inside the organization or from outside of it, this defense is better with Ardarius Washington in it. So it might be for Ardarius, he has to settle for a 1-year deal once the offseason once, I guess, next offseason comes around. But I mean, for Ardarius, this is going to be another injury mark on his resume. And that's tough because, you know, you kind of have to figure things out. And you also have the Qadri Ismail checking in. You know, Q's a big part of the show here. Q, appreciate you checking in, man. Hopefully you're doing well. Missed you today on our Tuesday episode. But Q says it's poor training that causes non-contact injuries. And, you know, it's so, you know, shaking the head here. Strength and conditioning will go unchecked. Obviously, Steve Saunders out of the building. The practices that Baltimore uses and has used over the past, and Q has come on this show and talked with us about it, and Q knows his stuff, obviously, with strength and performance and getting your body right and keeping your body right. It's difficult to see this. So to me, I think that for Baltimore, it starts hopefully a process where you're going to have to figure out how Ardarius was going to fit into your defense, first of all, and what skill set you want to replace him. Do you feel confident in the guys on your roster moving forward? And so the guys on the roster, let's just lay it out right now. It's Kyle Hamilton, Malachi Starks, Bo Braid, and Sanusi Kane. Those are the 4 guys you have on your roster to possibly replace Ardarius. Now, of course, it's not going to be Hamilton or Starks. Those guys are going to play their own role. So you then turn to a Bo Braid and a Sanusi Kane to help out, at least right now. We don't know if Baltimore will add another safety. I'd be pretty shocked if they don't, if we're being honest, and we'll talk about those options coming up a little later. But to me, it just feels like, you know, it's a big moment for Bo Braid. And Bo Braid, you know, if you're a Terps fan and you watched him at Maryland, he's someone that has a lot of skills that can help out. Sanusi Kane obviously is a thumper and a big special teams guy, and I think Baltimore does have confidence there, but I think a lot of people would feel more comfortable if for Ardarius, they replace him with a veteran and use that guy in tandem with, you know, who they already have, I'll say. So I don't necessarily know for Baltimore what that looks like, and we'll see. but it's just devastating. I mean, an injury happening like this in the middle of May, and we can just go over, and Q, if you're still here and you want to chime in on timelines, more than welcome to pull that up and talk about that with you through chat. But, the overview here is, it does depend, was it a full rupture? Was it a partial tear? We don't know. That information at the time of this live stream, it's not available. But recovery times, it can be pretty significantly different for some people, whether it's several months to a full year or longer. And for these things, usually it says here, just checking in on some of these websites, that usually you got to be in a boot for anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, and you have to rest up on it. But, it feels like, even just walking, it'll be 6 to 12 weeks in that boot. And then you have to be set maybe to keep your foot pointed downward. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm really trying my best here to figure that out. But, we've seen differentiating timelines. Cam Akers tore his Achilles. Actually, what was the Cam Akers Achilles recovery? Because Cam Akers was historically fast. So he tore his Achilles in mid-July, and he returned that same season, right? So it's anywhere from 6 to 9 months to 9 to 12 months, it looks like, and that is progress on how significant. But he returned in 5.5 months from an Achilles injury. And obviously, with him tearing his in mid-July, you're 2 months before mid-July here. I don't think Ardarius is going to be on that timeline. Typically, Baltimore likes to be more conservative when it comes to their injury timelines and their recovery timelines, which I think is how it should be. But, man, I think you're just going to miss a lot of the physicality. Look, Ardarius is small. He's smaller for a safety, but he brings physicality. He brings competitiveness. And, you're going to have to now figure that out, where I think for right now, with this version of the Ravens roster, it does limit a little bit of the versatility that you're going to have with a Kyle Hamilton and even a Malachi Starks, which I think it's the biggest part of why they drafted Starks and why they felt comfortable enough with that 3 safety rotation. So for Baltimore, the best course of action, you can trust Bo Braid if you want to, but at the end of the day, you need to have him step up, as well as probably a veteran option, just to have the depth and the ability, right? Just to have the depth and the ability. I mean, it just feels like Ardarius can't catch a break with these injuries, and that to me is some of it's the most upsetting part of this. So again, I think that the Ravens, in the grand scheme of things, they will be okay. Yeah, they'll be okay, especially if they bring in a vet. They'll be fine. But it doesn't lessen the blow that losing Ardarius is going to have on this team. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk a little bit more about life after Ardarius Washington for the Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned. We have plenty coming your way here on this instant reaction live edition of Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on the action. Now, FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, I'm a Denver Nuggets guy. Nuggets are actually playing in less than 2 hours live as we're recording this. The line has shifted from 10.5-point underdogs for the Nuggets to now they are 10-point road underdogs for them. It's, of course, they're playing the Thunder in Game 5. So if you're feeling good about the Nuggets, maybe winning that Game 5, or maybe you like Nikola Jokic over, Jamal Murray over, all that can be had over on FanDuel. Plus, adding a $200 bonus bets to that adds into the excitement if your first $5 bet hits. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make everyone more. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here on Locked On Ravens, an instant reaction live edition of the show. Under unfortunate circumstances, as Ardarius Washington has been reported by Ian Rappaport, has torn his Achilles. He will be lost for most, if not all, of the 2025 season. Again, we talked about kind of the injury timeline, and the recovery can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months to 9 to 12 months. And then obviously there is the getting back into play conditioning and all that, which is how Ardarius tore his Achilles in the first place. So it's devastating for a guy that works so hard. And I see Mike here saying this isn't a huge deal. Honestly, Washington isn't that good. Next man up. Glad we drafted Malachi. I disagree with the fact that Washington isn't that good. I think he was a very important part of it, and it is crazy. And, back to Mike and your point, Malachi is going to play a huge part of this. And while I don't think that losing Ardarius is going to make or break your season if you're the Ravens, it still is a pretty significant loss. And I'm not saying that it's of the same level as a Kyle Hamilton or Marlon Humphrey or Nnamdi Madubuike or Roquan or whatever. But, he was still expected to give you versatile options and making sure that whether it was resting guys for a snap or two or giving you high quality play if a Hamilton had to miss a game or a series, even though we've seen Hamilton leave games for a couple of series or a couple of quarters, right? Ardarius was someone who showed up for you in the biggest moments of games. He put his physicality on display. He forced turnovers for you. So, his stats aren't going to pop off the page, right? But I think when it comes to a player, there's obviously the stats aspect of it, but you also have to take into account the stuff that goes beyond the box score. And again, him being a clutch player, him having 64 tackles last season, he had a sack. He was able to force that fumble. He had 8 passes defensed, and alongside his 2 interceptions, I mean, that's 3 turnovers forced on the season with a sack, with the tackling ability, him being able to come up in run support. So, I mean, to me, Mike, I understand what you're saying in terms of Malachi. Like, Malachi is going to be a really big part of that. But I just think that there's so much more that Ardarius does bring beyond the box score that they are going to miss. And, they're going to have to try to replicate that with Abel Braid, who I think has some of that dog in himself. We saw Sanusi Kane hit guys hard on special teams. But Ardarius was just starting to prove himself as a commodity here, as someone that the Ravens could trust and rely on. The only thing that was that question mark was the health. And unfortunately, that failed Ardarius again, and it's going to be a blow to what Baltimore wanted to try to do on defense. And as we get into the final part of the show in a couple of minutes, and again, tomorrow we're going to be diving into the other options outside the organization a lot more. So again, be sure you check out that episode tomorrow. We'll have Sam and Njoku come on the Ravens Talk podcast to talk about that. There's just a lot of, I don't know if reflection is the right word, but you just kind of sit there and stare in disbelief, because it's like, man, the Ravens have had pretty good injury luck over the past 2 seasons in terms of significant injuries. Guys have missed games. Guys have missed a couple of weeks. But having an injury like this to a significant contributor has been pretty few and far in between over the last couple of seasons. I just don't want this to be a precursor to maybe what's to come. And let's all knock on wood together that this is the only significant injury the Ravens have, and that they're able to figure things out. And again, as the schedule release happens tomorrow and we figure that out, it's going to depend, like the bye week, where the Ravens playing on short weeks. Like, a lot of that's going to have to do with things. But, Ardarius was a big part of what they did. He was a big part of what they did. There are options to replace his production, but again, it doesn't lessen who he was to Baltimore's defense last season. And it doesn't lessen the fact that, they're going to miss him in a couple of different spots. So, for what Baltimore has now, the big thing for me is this defense, this version of the defense has to figure out Kyle Hamilton, right? Using him all around the field as that Swiss Army knife, figuring him out as well. And I see Stat Padford here saying, I'd rather see Kyle at the nickel anyway. Let Starks play deep. Kyle in the nickel is a very good option for them. And again, it's what, to me, made Ardarius valuable to them, because if you had Starks and Ardarius deep, that allows you to put Kyle wherever you wanted to. And that includes maybe you wanted to play Marlon in the nickel in some of those snaps. Marlon's a great slot corner. And so you had Hamilton as a roamer and Marlon in the slot. Maybe you put Kyle in the slot and you're able to utilize those guys better, right? Like, Hamilton is the key to this defense, and he unlocks everything. And so we see, we've seen Hamilton and Humphrey. This is for both those guys, make key plays from the slot, even on first down in the run game. In the run game, it was huge. Him throwing guys and Marlon throwing guys off and making tackles in the backfield. Those guys tag team guys as well from that position. So, they'll have to either put trust in Bo Braid or Sanusi Kane. I feel like either guy, it's going to depend on what skill set they're looking for, whether they want more of a nickel player to replace Ardarius or more of a safety type to replace Ardarius. But, it's going to be interesting. And this is actually a very good question, Liquid. I don't know the answer to this. Does this mean Washington's a restricted free agent again next offseason since he didn't accrue any playing time? If anybody has an answer to that, be sure to put it in the chat. I don't know. I'm going to do research after the show ends. Obviously, I've been kind of scrambling to put all this together, get posts out of what's going on social media as well. So I'll try to have an answer for that. But right now, I don't know. But the harsh reality for Ardarius in terms of what his next contract is going to look like or next qualifying offer is going to look like is it's not going to be big. It's essentially J.K. Dobbins, and it's not exactly 1-for-1, but obviously J.K. was entering that contract year and everyone was expecting a big year from J.K. And then he tears his Achilles in week 1 and he has to settle for a prove-it deal. And he did prove it in Los Angeles, but he still is looking for a contract, right? He hasn't signed anywhere yet. So it's just the harsh reality of a guy can have all the talent in the world. He can be a great player, but if he can't stay healthy, it's going to impact how much they make. It's going, and this isn't sports, it'll impact their next deal, because one of the best qualities you can have is availability. And unfortunately for Ardarius, it hasn't been there for him. He had a great year last season. He helped Baltimore out in a lot of different ways, but he can't help them from the sideline. He can't help anybody from the sideline. And if he had a great season, maybe he goes off and signs elsewhere and the Ravens get a comp pick. There are all these different fallout effects, but I feel bad for Ardarius. I feel bad for the situation and everything. But to me, there are still options to replace Ardarius. Now, obviously, we've talked about internally what those could look like, but there are still pretty quality safety options available on the free agent market. So coming up in the final part of the show, we're going to be diving into some of those options, who they could be, do they make sense for the Ravens, price points, skill sets, and a lot more coming up on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Tuesday evening, right about 8 o'clock at night. Baltimore loses Ardarius Washington for the season, or most of it at least, if not all. We don't know the exact timeline yet, so we're going to see. But at least for a significant portion of the 2025 season, torn Achilles. He suffers it while conditioning, according to Ian Rappaport. Not a lot of other information has come out at the time we're recording this, but of course, as the Ravens maybe release stuff or there are other things that come out, we'll react to it. But for now, the Ravens have Kyle Hamilton, Malachi Starks, Bo Braid, and Sanusi Kane in their safety room. But I don't feel like that's going to be the end result when it comes to Baltimore's safety room this year. I have a lot of confidence in guys like Bo Braid and Sanusi Kane to step up in some way. But if we're being honest, I think that Baltimore is going to have to look to outside to figure it out. There are options available, and we'll just go over some of those options right now. Now, I just want to get this out of the way first. Marcus Williams is not coming back. All right? That does not solve anything. Marcus, I don't even think they can bring him back right now. I think there's a cap. Like, you can't re-sign a player you cut for, I think, a full year. So it's not even an option for the Ravens. So let's just get that out of the way now. The other guys you have, and I've seen a lot of it in the chat, Justin Simmons and Julian Blackmon. Those have been the two names that have been most popular in the chat. Those are probably the two best options for Baltimore right now. You also have guys like Jordan Whitehead, Quandre Diggs. Could you reunite with Chuck Clark? It's possible. Jordan Poyer, Kevon Wallace, Marcus May, Rodney McLeod. Von Bell is an option for them. Maybe a Tashawn Gibson. So, again, it kind of falls off as you get further down that list. I think that Justin Simmons is honestly very intriguing. The thing for Justin Simmons does come the price point, right? Simmons was someone who wanted a big deal last year. He ended up getting, I guess, some level. I mean, it wasn't really that big of a deal. It was a 1 year, $7.5 million deal. And we have to remember, for these 1 year contracts, those are fully guaranteed deals, right? Those 1 year deals, those are fully guaranteed. So Baltimore's ideal option here, and honestly, you could do this for this year and next, is probably signing a guy to a 2-year contract, unless that 1-year deal falls under a pretty small amount of money. So, like a Chidobe Awuzie deal, for example, that 1-year deal could make sense for them. Now, I think that when you look at some of the guys who have already signed, I don't know how many of these guys would have been, up Baltimore's alley. Juan Thornhill, Andre Cisco, Jeremy Chin would have been intriguing. They weren't going to sign guys like Justin Reed or Javon Holland, etc. But then you get kind of down into those when Marcus Epps have made sense, who's also a very good special teamer. Could they have brought Tony Jefferson back in after he had a pretty solid year in Los Angeles? Maybe. But I think the guys you're probably looking at are Justin Simmons and Julian Blackmon. I think Quandre Diggs could make some sense with some of his versatility. I'm not sure. Chuck Clark comes back. I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. Clark had some pretty, I don't want to say harsh, but some telling comments about his time in the organization. So it adds a need, right? It adds a need for them, where we were talking about Baltimore's roster where there weren't like a ton of holes to fill. Obviously like a fifth defensive lineman to replace Michael Pierce, maybe another guard, maybe another vet wide receiver, although I've seen that online. I don't really believe that personally, but I've seen it. Really kind of felt like DT was the last possible need for them. But to me, I think that like if you want to go like top of the top here, Simmons would be that option. Blackmon is another player who is younger by about 5 years than Simmons is. So if you wanted to sign him to a 2-year contract and kind of see how it works out, it's possible. But a lot of these guys are going to fall into that like 28 to 32 range. You just start to get a little further down the list. You start to get into the 34-year-olds, the 33-year-olds. So I think that while age doesn't necessarily matter if it's a 1-year replacement, if the guy can play, the guy can play. I think Simmons does give you some of that versatility. Honestly, a lot of these guys do. And, if you are someone that wasn't a believer in Ardarius because of his size, personally, I do not count size against players like other people do. Well, these guys, they're a bit bigger than Ardarius, but Ardarius plays with heart, and a lot of these other guys do as well. But, if they wanted to go out there and get a Justin Simmons, I just don't know what his price point is going to be. A Julian Blackmon, for example, he just is coming off his rookie contract right now. He signed was it a qualifying offer? I don't know. I think it might have been a qualifying offer for Julian Blackmon because he finished out his rookie deal last year and then completed it this past season. So even still, you're looking at guys who, for the most part, have either had multiple paydays at the NFL level or they're looking for their next one. I don't know what that looks like for Baltimore in terms of who they would actually want to spend money on, or if they just want to give the keys to Beau Brade and say, hey, we believe in you enough. I think that is somewhat risky with Baltimore's current contention window with this team, with, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler all being free agents. You have to worry about other extensions. So, I think that Brade has an option, but I just feel like for me, I would rather have both on the roster, to where if Beau Brade doesn't work out, you have a Blackmon or a Diggs or a Simmons or whoever to figure it out if Brade doesn't work. Because what was partially part of why the Ravens secondary was not, was not all that good in the first part of the season. It was because they kept going back to the well and they were hesitant to give Ardarius somewhat of a full role. So I think that if you want to free up Kyle Hamilton and you feel confident enough in Beau Brade, that's completely fine. Like I think Beau Brade has the potential to be an unsung hero of Baltimore's defense this year if they give him that option. But in my opinion, you have to also understand the reality. If you're Baltimore, as the sirens go by here live, can't really edit that out on live, but there it is. You have to kind of live with the reality. There's a possibility that it doesn't work out, right? There's a possibility it doesn't. And so in that scenario, I would rather have a contingency plan, an option. And if that eliminates Simmons from your category because he wants money and he wants a bigger role than just being a contingency option, then okay. You can bring in a Quandre Diggs or maybe it is Chuck Clark. I don't know. Maybe it's Kevon Wallace. Like, there are lesser options, both money-wise and role-wise, if you are a Beau Brade believer, that can be a contingency plan. But I think that going into the year with just the 4 you have right now would be foolish. I think you do need a fifth option, and that someone could be a lesser player on a lesser deal if you believe in Beau Brade. But, you know, it is what it is, right? Because you can't bank on a guy being good, right? There's all the potential in the world. There are possibilities that guy is good, but you can't bank on that. So I would be fine if they brought in a Quandre Diggs. You know, I feel like that's kind of the medium option between, hey, we're going to give Beau Brade some opportunities, and we're not going to give him any opportunities. Go in there and sign a Justin Simmons, right? I think Quandre Diggs, maybe even a Kevon Wallace could be, those middle options that I feel like could be pretty solid for them overall. And again, we'll dive into this in a lot more detail on tomorrow in tomorrow's show that will come out at 6 a.m. Eastern time. We'll talk about outside possibilities for Baltimore to replace Ardarius, but you know, just a devastating situation all around. This team needs to find more ways to free up Kyle Hamilton. Ardarius is going to be a big part of that alongside Malachi Starks. And again, that Malachi Starks pick looking huge now. Not that it wasn't before, but looking absolutely huge now with the fact that, you know, they now have that other safety option. But losing Ardarius it's a big blow, and it's tough. You know, I feel awful for Ardarius and him. Prayers up, and hopefully a speedy recovery for Ardarius Washington. But that's all I have for you here today on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. Thank you for tuning in on this Tuesday evening. Tonight, we'll of course be back tomorrow talking more Ravens football, talking about other options to replace Ardarius Washington from outside the organization, talking about Beau Brade from inside the organization as well. So be sure on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along in audio form, and subscribe as well. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.